Okay. Right, so we're back after a couple of weeks away, and it is the countdown towards ChillCon, the event in Derby on the 17th of March. So it's time to well, you could say it's past time to get the painting competition entry painted. But I've decided, totally decided, not just accidentally realised, that I'm almost out of time. So it's time to get some paint on the Mini. In a previous sort of video, we discussed that I was going to use this Rackham Orc from the Confrontation game. It's come together really nicely since the last time you've seen it. Obviously, I've just finished popping it together, pinned it down to this handle, and got a nice zenithal on it. Just using the tell you what, I wish I'd recorded doing the zenithal because it was really interesting. It was the first time I've used. Let me pan out a second. This AK Black Primer. This stuff is fantastic. I have a bit of an issue with a lot of airbrush primers. I tend to have a lot of problems with them, a lot of clogging issues, and I'm sure that's part me, without a shadow of a doubt. But this stuff was phenomenal. I just put in a couple of drops of, what is this, Flow Improver. A couple of drops of Flow Improver, straight in with maybe twice the amount of this compared to Flow Improver, straight onto the Mini, no problems at all. Feathered it slightly to try and prevent clogs, that kind of thing, same as I always do, but no issues whatsoever. Then for the zenithal, just went in with kind of the classic kind of just some white ink for that, rather than trying to sort of work with an actual paint on that. But I mean, this does what it always does. Lovely, smooth, highly pigmented, blah, blah, blah. It's an ink. But this is just fantastic. Like, the finish on it was perfect. Like, it wasn't as matte, I would say, as, like, the standard third generation AK acrylics. But it wasn't kind of Citadel level satin either. It was a really nice in between. So yeah, really, really nice. So yeah, I just thought, as I'm going to have to put a lot of painting hours in this weekend, why not stream a little? So also going to try out some new brushes for this job. I got a set of Raphael 8408s. So I think a little while ago I spoke about, like, I didn't have a great time with the 8404s. Whether it was just my brushes, whether or not it's generally, I don't know. I know a lot of people love them. I found that they just kind of fell apart really quick. Like I said before, it's not. I don't profess to be an expert in any form of painting or brush care, but I mean, they were unable to hold a point for more than a couple of painting sessions, and I wasn't being that rough with them, so I don't know, maybe I just got a bad batch. But someone suggested, look, try the 8408s. They sort of suggested these are much better brushes. Now, obviously, the concept of a better brush is a somewhat tricky thing. It's such a personal thing about what you like about brushes. The slightly tricky thing with this set is they're designed for botanical watercolours. So they give you a 2-0, a 2, and a 6. And the 6 is, is huge. Like, by comparison, let's pull out a 6 from the Artist Opus set. Now, that's quite a difference between those two brushes. Though I've got to be honest, I really like the handles on the Raphael paintbrushes. Like, the swell heading towards the start of the ferrule is just so much bigger, so much nicer to hold. I personally find with the Artist Opus ones, I love these brushes, but they don't have quite such a natural feel, like being almost there's a taper and there is a little bit of a swell, but it's not like that. And you can see there that it's just huge, the swell in that. And part of that is obviously the size of the brush, etc, 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 but this is a 6 as well. And then when you look at the difference in the size of the swell in the handle, you start to get a feel for kind of why I say there's a big difference in terms of how they feel in the hand. And one of the things I've been meaning to doing is just to use bigger brushes for simple jobs. This is a good example of actually the mini's quite big. It is a standard scale kind of fantasy wargame miniature, but if we put it up again, if we put it next to, I don't know, let's say even like a 40k miniature, which to my mind are always a little bit chunky, like a Kroot, this guy's beefy. Like, he's big. This was kind of part of the look and feel of Rackham miniatures, to be honest. They had a kind of chunky beefiness to them, and a real delicacy if you look at like the Lions of Alahan or stuff like that. They had when they weren't great big frickin' orcs with double-headed sword axes rather. They had some real delicate pieces. But yeah, so well, without further ado, let's dive in. Try some new brushes along the way as well. So let me know in the comments what your experience has been if you've used the Raphael brushes. I'd be keen to hear from sort of other people that have been there and done that, and maybe learnt some lessons that I need to learn. I just need to deal with the new, what I always call new brush coat. Whenever you get new brushes, we all know what it's like. There's stuff in the bristles that just needs to be washed out before you can even really start using it, whether it's kind of like a light wax or something of that ilk. There we are, that seems to have got it. See, immediately that is filling me with hope on these brushes, and maybe it was just a bad set that I had of the 8404s, because that's been washed quite thoroughly there, quite aggressively, to get rid of that wax and soap that they leave in to shape the bristles in storage. And it's immediately, oh, if I can get back into camera, come to a really nice point with really no effort at all. That was not my experience with the 8404s. I would wash them. They would come out of the pot, and they would, you'd have bristles going in every direction. The only thing that does slightly concern me about this is it's a very long bristle, which means it's quite prone to taking a shape. That's going to be an interesting thing to manage. I'll have to keep an eye on that. I suppose that's quite an interesting thing, really, is like preference for short or longer bristles. I'm on record, as it were, sort of saying that I kind of like to be difficult and have a bit of an in between. I'm not a huge fan of, for instance, the what are they called, the Artisopus Series M brushes, where they're like a really short, really short bristle. But at the same time, kind of the extended bristle brushes that you can get, especially kind of cheaper, they tend to be cheaper, and aimed at kind of other hobbies as opposed to sort of detailed miniature painting, I tend to find anyway, at least what I've seen online. I'm just at the moment mixing up some matte medium with a little bit of water, ready to use that whenever I'm like really trying. Like, this is, I have no illusions about entering this painting competition. I am not going to win anything. I'm not going to place. I'm not even going to score particularly well. I'm not a competition painter. What this is for me is an opportunity to sort of challenge myself with the question of how good can you paint something right now? Where am I actually at? If I genuinely say, hey, do the absolute best job you can on this miniature in this time period, what can you achieve? That to me is really useful. That's, a real opportunity to say, hey, this is where I'm at. these are some areas that I now know I really want to work on next. And that is partly why, like, I've chosen an orc. Like, I'm always pretty comfortable with orcs in the sense of I've painted a lot of them. My challenge here, therefore, is not am I choosing the right colours, etc., but am I getting the blends that I want, the highlights that I want, the finishes that I want? All those kinds of questions, which I think are far more interesting in terms of longer term development. But yeah, I just tend to find like a little plastic shot glass there, with a bit of what was it? What am I using? Liquitex acrylic matte medium, maybe sort of 2/3 that, 1/3 water, is just like the ideal thing for being able to quickly dilute and smooth out paint as needed. So let's get set up and ready to go there. I'm going to base coat in the skin with a Chimera Colors. What is this? It's the Phthalo Green? Yes, Phthalo Green. Really nice, deep, rich colour. Just going to give that a quick... blitz on the old Vortex mixer. Give me just a moment. I'll mute the sound because it's not pleasant for you. There we go. Let's hope that gave it enough. And give it a good shake by hand as well. I've got to say, I've been really enjoying using the Chimera colours recently a lot more. For a long time I kind of had them, but would only pull them out for very specific jobs. And actually, yeah, for a long time, I'm not gonna lie, they were very difficult to get hold of. Like, it was pretty much a case of, did you back the Kickstarter that they're doing that month? No, well then you ain't getting one for, you know, months and months and months. Which made me very hesitant to just use the paint. One thing I really like about it is the thickness that most of them, especially for instance the Phthalo Green, come in. Them providing it in such a thick format really allows me to decide how I want to work with the paint, which is big. Like, there's definitely an argument for pre-diluted paint or paint that comes out of the pot at the right consistency, assuming you know exactly what your customer is going to be doing with it, which in fairness, like, some manufacturers do. Pardon me a moment. Manufacturers like Games Workshop, Army Painter, etc., they know pretty much exactly what their user base is wanting this paint for, what they're going to do with it, and the techniques that they're going to use it with. So then the question becomes, why complicate things by offering a paint that the user has to put additional effort in to get to a point where they can do what the manufacturer knows they want to do with it? I think the approach of Chimera, though, is that kind of, they acknowledge that they don't necessarily, you know, obviously they know their audience, very well, and they know that their audience quite specifically wants the freedom to not have to, you know, base wash, layer, highlight. Good example. You know, that people buying these paints aren't the people who are sticking to that exact formula of how to paint miniatures. And what that has really allowed them to do is just focus on creating the most, like, amazing colours. Like this, the coverage on this Phthalo Green is not great. I deliberately probably thinned it down a little more than I needed to here. But very much looking to do the kind of careful build up, couple of thin coats to get a nice smoothness to it. And I am very aware that starting so dark basically removes the benefit of this zenithal in terms of painting, but actually what I've used the zenithal for on this occasion, and what I if I'm honest, I find this is more often than not what I use zenithals for broadly, is that it's like a light sketch for me. It shows me where the light is hitting the mini, it shows me where I should be thinking about highlights. But because I'm not using, you know, transparent paints, speed paints, contrast paints, etc., it's less useful in terms of the actual painting, and more just in terms of getting that guide almost, so that now when I'm painting in my head I can be thinking, okay, well, there was a lot of white here, there was a lot of black there. I kind of know where I should be thinking about highlights and where I should be thinking about shading. And again, that sounds very basic, that sounds probably excessively basic, but it's tremendously useful. So one thing with a big brush like this, you've got to be constantly like removing some moisture from it with a paper towel, because it just absolutely drinks water whenever it goes near the pot. But what it also does is give a really nice smooth. I'm very aware that this doesn't look smooth at all. When I look at the monitor, I can kind of see it looks very splotchy. That is largely, obviously, down to the zenithal, but the actual application is incredibly thin, incredibly smooth, and the bigger brush is really helping with that in terms of just getting nice, sort of big, full strokes. And don't get me wrong, like, this is not going to be useful to me much beyond the first couple of, you know, the base colours, really. But that's okay. Like, if I get a couple of really nice, strong base coats done with this brush, then that, to me, that's worth it. Like, a brush that allows me to reliably do that is a brush that's worth having. One interesting thing about this orc is actually the amount of clothing he's got. It's one of those things where you kind of think, oh yeah, well, it's going to all be orky flesh, and you think, oh, actually no, he's got like some kind of fabric or leather going on. He's got quite a lot of different textures in here. But despite its size, I've got to say, like, base coating with this brush is no more difficult in terms of accuracy of the areas that I'm hitting than working with a much smaller brush, except the fact that it's so much quicker. So no, I think already, like, in terms of the brush quality, I'm really enjoying this. The snapback is really good. Like, it's actually holding, especially for a large brush, it's holding its shape a lot more than I thought it would. I thought I was going to have to be forever re-wetting, reshaping, and really managing it quite closely. But it's holding really nicely. And that, for me, is a huge deal. Let me a bit up there. Don't want little bits left out. Again, I'm not particularly worrying about being overly delicate with this at this point. Right, interestingly, most of this guy's arms are completely covered. He's got these kind of I don't even know how to describe the clothing that this miniature is wearing, but he's got basically these little bits of fabric here, or leather, that connect at the front, go down his arms, great big kind of armoured gloves there. Then he's got this sort of midriff patch where it's just skin, and then sort of a raggedy armoured skirt down here as well. Blade in the middle, and then obviously his legs and feet are exposed. But overall, like there's a lot less skin than you might expect from like the GW Savage Orcs are a good example of where there is so much, like so much skin. Like I love those miniatures, but painting them was always for me like it was a lot, you know. Like to paint that much skin was an awful lot. Oh, I may have slightly overwatered down the paint there, or over thinned it I should say, but that's okay. We will get this on and then come back in with another coat in just a moment. This is kind of the big advantage in my mind of the of using the matte medium rather than water, is that even when, and I'm prone to it still, you over dilute or over thin, the paint holds together a lot better when you're using a medium, I find. Which makes perfect sense, you know. That's medium's job, is to help bind it all up. There we go, slightly thicker there. The other thing I find with Chimera, to be honest, is that it does just generally hold together better. Like their paints provide quite a nice. They emulsify well. They sit together nicely. They ultimately, pigment doesn't dissolve into the thing. It never becomes a true kind of mix. It's always just emulsified. And so if you can manage that and keep things nice and flat, I'm always on board. So yeah, not smooth in the sense of the finish, but it's got to be said, that paint's added no texture. That paint's gone on really nice and thin, really nice and smooth, and I can now go back in with another coat for just for making sure we've got a really nice solid base coat. So just mix that up, add a bit more paint in. There we are. Start where we previously started. You can immediately start to see how with two pretty thin coats of this stuff, we start to develop a really sort of rich and deep base colour, which I'll be able to use. One thing I really like about the Chimera colours as well is their use of kind of very well-known colour definitions, like phthalo green and blue. Phthalo blue, that is, not just blue. That really helps in terms of thinking about what that colour has in it. Like, this is a very rich, very dark green. It has very strong blue tones in it. It therefore, I know, will create a fairly good deep shade for this, that I can build up pretty high on without worrying too much about the whole sort of areas being washed out of any kind of depth. Whereas I tend to find that when colours have, best way to put it, like genre-specific names, like classic example, Orkhide Shade from Games Workshop. Actually, a really great colour, but I have no concept from that, from that name as to what that colour is really going to be. Like, if I know Games Workshop, I know it's going to be a green of some kind. Now, because it says shade, I would hope that it would be a fairly dark colour, but I don't know. And that to me remains a problem. And not, to be fair, not just Games Workshop. Like, I know, interestingly, like, Army Painter had the same issue, but on their, their new paints called Fanatic, I think. In the Fanatic line, they've introduced a new naming convention, where they have their, what I would describe as like their silly name, their fun name, their marketing name, and then they have a very descriptive name using like a standardized color naming format. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. That, to me, is fantastic. There we go, and you can see there how brilliantly dark that colour really is. So I'll let that sit for a minute. And to give you some idea, this is where we are headed with the skin. Sort of further down the line, we are heading all the way up to frog green and like with a bit of light warm grey mixed in. So we're really going to push up into bright orc skin for this guy. The original sort of colours that Rackham would use for these miniatures were very bright. I'm not going for quite originals. You can see the for one thing, they're much better at painting than me. You can see all this is non-metallic metal. You can see the whole body apart from the head and feet are tattooed, thus it's a lot darker. I won't be doing that. Their orc skin in general was very, very bright, very very poppy, very almost realistic looking. Like I will try and capture some of this. I'm in my mind still playing around with, do I have a go at some non-metallic metal? My gut instinct is God no, but we'll see what we're like for time and then make a decision as we go along, I think. So that green is on there. I'm just waiting for that to go. And this is the one downside I think of thinning with medium, is once the medium's on the miniature, it can slow the paint drying time. It acts in that sense as a bit of a retarder. It's great if you are wanting to wet blend, give you that extra time, but actually I want to give this some time to dry and make sure I've got a really strong green there as my foundation for the skin. What I can be thinking about in the meantime, though, are the leathers. So I know, for instance, that I'm going to be looking at like a dark brown leather with some lighter leathers on top, some studs put in. So I think I'm probably going to lean on slightly kind of fairly warm brown tones for the leather. I don't want to overdo it on the kind of cool yellowy tones, otherwise the whole miniature just starts to look a little bit washed out. For these, I'm mostly going to try and stick to kind of AK 3rd Gen and Pro Acryl. I might dip into Scale 75, but I'm really not sure about doing so, if I'm honest. They are so much more matte than, especially Pro Acryl. Pro Acryl's got quite a nice, like, Pro Acryl doesn't have a satin finish. It is a matte finish, but it is on the more satin end, I personally find. Along with AK 3rd Gen, again, they are definitely matte paints, but they're not as matte as Scale 75's finish, I found anyway. I tend to find, especially when you're using something like the matte medium, you have to be a little bit more aware of that. Because typically you thin with water, you're going to make something a slightly more satin finish. When you're thinning with matte medium, that doesn't happen. So whatever the paint inherently finishes as, you tend to get that, if not a bit more matte, which you tend to see with like if you put matte medium into Citadels, that kind of thing, they matte down a little bit. So that's drying relatively okay. Those feet are still giving me a little bit of a problem. So some elements of this might just need a third thin coat just to really nail it. But beyond that, then next up we're going to be heading over to AK dark green, and then going up through dark green, deep green, light green, frog green, up into bright warm grey. So yeah, lots of layers to come on the skin. In terms of the leather, though, I'm still in my mind trying to decide where to go with that. Like, I'm almost tempted with, if I can find it, it's a really nice chimera. It's not one of the single colours, which is why it's taking me a minute to find the thing. I think this one. Yeah, one of the Russo colours, the dark honey. It's not a colour I've really used much before, but I remember looking at it and thinking, oh, that would be nice for a really warm leather. I'm wondering if I could do that and then go to something like a, well, gold 79 from the Carlson set. Might be a bit of a jump, maybe a mix between the two, somewhere in that ballpark. Because the actual browns, like Oxide Brown, it's obviously got quite a strong red to it. Oxide Brown Dark, I'm guessing there's a light. Yep, Oxide Brown Light. We could try them as well. They're going to be a much reddier sort of colour. Which I'm not sure I really want with the green, if I'm honest. I think I might stick to just trying the dark honey as the base, and then a mix in towards gold 79. But I think we'll see. Because previously, when I was painting that Marauder skeleton, I did the kind of standard scale 75 leather, quite beaten up, all the way from black leather up to birch as kind of those scratched in highlights. And that it was really cool. Like I was actually quite pleased with the finish. But I think it would be fair to say that what's the best? Like it wasn't anything special. Like it was quite specific. It was fine. It kind of suited that miniature because everything was so desaturated. That was a deliberate choice on that. This is kind of the opposite. Like the skin is going to be bright freaking green. Like there's no intention of this being a, oh, is that green? It's like no, this is green. This paint color. So interestingly, that dark honey is a lot brighter than I expected it to be, and this is a good example, I think, of like when you find a colour and you start looking at using it for the first time. Like that is, if I could get out, like that's quite a that would be a very bright base coat, and I'm slightly concerned it would be too bright. That's almost more at the level where it's the highlight colour that I'm after, I think. Yeah. This is a good example of how just a little test swatch can really change your mind. It's one of the reasons I really like using a wet palette, is that ability to drop a splodge of paint on there, drag it out, see what it really looks like. Because that is a lovely colour, but not the colour that I'm looking for right now. Like there, I'm now wondering if that dark brown oxide might be a better way. You can see I don't use this very often because the medium is very much separated from the pigment. So I'm going to be back on the Vortex mixer. So I'm going to mute the sound for just a moment. Another thing I really like about the Chimera colours is the mixer in them. Like it makes so much noise when it moves around. You're never uncertain as to where you are with the paint. You know, if you can hear it moving, it's moving. So that's that dark oxide. Let's see how that responds. A little bit of medium, a little bit of paint. Oh, that's an interesting. I'm not sure about that. Largely because it's quite like it's really quite red. That is not a little bit. Like that is a very red brown, like darker without a shadow of a doubt, but a very red brown. Like if I was going to go for something like that, I'd almost think, should I just go for mahogany or something like that from the Pro Acryl range? Would that be better? Because I do want to go for a fairly classic kind of fantasy leather here, kind of like they have in the. If I try and zoom in a little bit on the original artwork, you can see it's quite. You might be able to see. It's a fairly typical kind of scorch brown, bestial brown mix, and then a kind of vermin up on the armor strips. Which I think they've done kind of non-metallic copper on. I will not be doing non-metallic copper. Just to put that out there right now, I'll either do lighter leathers or just paint in an actual copper. Chances are, at least initially, I will just leave them unpainted, and then come back to them when I've decided whether we're doing metallics or non-metallics based on time. I strongly suspect we'll be going true metallic metal, just to put that out there nice and early. But we'll come back to that at a suitable time. Obviously it's a different head for the miniature, but like this head's fine. I prefer the older scowling orc with the beard and the hair. Okay, let's. I don't want to spend forever thinking about leather. I think this oxide one is going to be fine. I think I'm just going to jump in with that and work from there. Otherwise, what colour should I base coat my leather becomes a 20-minute exercise in wasting time and procrastinating and not getting any paint on the miniature, which is always the the worst outcome of these things, right? The whole point is to get paint on the mini, get started. If I find it's wrong, worst case scenario, like with the cloak of that Marauder skeleton, just got to change it. It's only paint at the end of the day, isn't it? But yeah, I think in that little exchange there, you can see how much I don't plan these things properly. I'll be honest, like I quite enjoy figuring this stuff out on the fly. Like I tend to have like some go-to recipes, or certainly I used to. I find now that a lot of them that I went to use one the other day for beige cloth that I always really liked. Only to realise, of course, that all the colours in the Citadel range have changed, and none of the stuff that I would have used to achieve what I wanted to achieve exists anymore. So you can't really buy them. I did have a quick look on eBay, but Desert Sand doesn't seem to be one of those colours that people hoarded and are now reselling at a massive value, which is a great shame because it was a fantastic and underrated colour, in my opinion. Like I would use it a lot. I would use it for highlighting almost anything, the same way a lot of people now use was it pale sand and stuff like that. I would use desert sands back in day. No, it's yeah, just one of those colours that was just a great utility colour. You could mix it into lots of other things. A bit like Graveyard Earth in that regard. Graveyard Earth was a fantastic colour for highlighting green. you could mix it in and get a really nice earthy desaturated green with very little effort. Like it paired wonderfully with Cassion green. Like it was like the perfect color for mixing in to generate a highlight for Cassion green. It was always one of my favourite mixes. I must admit, like I would kind of look for opportunities to use it. Just because I liked that colour combination so much. There is or was I don't know anymore, Space Marine chapter. I want to say it might have been the Raptors or something along that line, that were like a somewhat military-esque green. So for a long while I painted them, really just so I could use that colour combination. It was easy to paint, it always came out well. You didn't even have to be particularly accurate because, in terms of the mix, because Catechin Green was such a forgiving colour. It had so much pigment in it that you could really give it some and it would still very visibly be green. And that sounds a little bit daft, I realise, but like, when sometimes you can be mixing and colours just seem to they stop being the main hue that they were at the start of the mix. It can be a really odd thing, and it's ultimately just about how much of that pigment is really there and how much of it is made up of other colours, right, that start coming out as they interact with other pigments. But like some older GW paints were terrible for it, but not Catching Green. It was incredibly forgiving, always kind of maintained its greenness, which sounds odd, but you get what I mean. That is the one, I think, major downside to the Chimera paints is they are not forgiving, and they're not designed to be. Like, they're not, they are very close to my experience of using like artists' acrylics, much more so than most miniature paints are. And like, I mean, don't run like acrylics in general are a very forgiving form of paint. They're not like oils or watercolors. But even then, like the relative opacity and ease of which you can work with miniature paints compared to artist paints is very high. Like, they are designed to do a lot of the most tricky things about working with acrylics for you, or just remove them from the equation altogether. Like in terms of how you need to mix them, or what thinners you need, and all these sorts of things just aren't a big deal with miniature paints, and I would say they are back to being a bigger deal with Chimera and the ilk of Chimera. This move towards technically higher quality paints kind of challenges us to work a lot harder, because we now, it's on us as opposed to on the paint to do a lot of the legwork. And I don't think historically that's... Well, I say historically, obviously originally, when you look back at the old GW stuff, they were painting with enamels, they were painting with oils, they were painting with gouache, acrylics, all these kinds of things. So in a weird way, this is actually a bit more like truly original miniature painting before we had our own specialist paints. But these days it does feel like a totally different experience, because the miniature paints have gotten so good. Like, it's almost terrifying how good they have got. Like, when you look at Pro Acryl, AK 3rd Gen, all these things, like, it's incredible. Like the quality that they are that they're putting out in paint. It really is impressive. So the good news is, having put that on, I quite like that dark oxide brown. It goes on quite nicely. I think it gives quite a nice deep hue. I am definitely going to need to recess shade it, which is a little bit annoying. I wasn't really planning on doing that, but I feel like it is going to be worth it, because otherwise it's just going to be a little bit... It's going to end up being lighter than I want when I put a highlight on top of that, and I'd kind of like to situate my highlight somewhere between layers as opposed to this being the true base. But I think what I'll be able to do is just potentially mix down some wash from an actual paint. I definitely don't want to hit it with an actual wash. I really don't want any staining across the armor. I feel like that would be a problem that I would have to that I would end up needing to fix. Yeah, I think so. Oh. You can never really be sure with these things, right? You kind of just have to keep going and hoping for the best. Right, let's get the rest of this oxide on. I'm going to continue with it for the full arm covers, but I think what I'm then going to do is try and introduce some variance in terms of the level of wear on different areas, and in terms of things like the straps. So there's a strap going around the wrist there. I'd like to call that out a little bit rather than allowing it to just blend in. And even as I say that, part of me is like, do I really just want to randomly draw attention to what is effectively his elbow? I think I might just have to wait and see how this all lands together. Again, you know, it's only paint at the end of the day. If I get to the end and go, nah, do you know what? I don't want to call out additional details. I just won't. If I get to the end and think, yeah, do you know what? It really needs it, then I'll slap on some more paint. It'll be kind of a decision I can make as I go along, which is quite nice. The other great thing is that this orc is wearing gloves. Love that. It was one of those things where I really liked the way orcs were portrayed in the Rackham world. Like, they were a kind of barbarian, war-torn society, or warlords-driven society, all that kind of thing. Very, you know, big, shouty, combat-driven, blah, 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 blah. But it was a society. It wasn't just... you know, just no real story beyond fight stuff, kill stuff, scrap, be funny. Which, don't get me wrong, I'm all for in the Warhammer universe, because the Warhammer universe needs a faction to be that. You can't have that level of grimdark without a comic relief faction. And whether or not people would like to admit it, that's what, to me, that's what, certainly 40k orcs, that is what they're for. They are the comic relief faction of the thing. That's not to say they aren't serious, that they aren't cool. You know, big 40k orc fan. But they provide a very much needed break from the grittiness of from 40k, from grimdark, the grimdark nature of the game and the setting and the just everything about it. And then they are just bright green loons who invent stuff seemingly more based on force of will than technical ability. You know, they have these wars where literally all they want to do is have a good scrap. They have no, or have very little in terms of strategy and objectives and all these kinds of things beyond having a good scrap. They invent these crazy technologies that simply shouldn't work. And they're bright green, and they've grown from fungus and all this stuff. Like, it's so needed in 40k, where everything else is very heavy, very grim dark, and that's not I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's what it is. That's the setting, and that setting, to my mind, only works because you then have this massive offset, this ability to go, yep, but remember, it's still funny because da 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 da. Otherwise, it would be a really depressing setting. You look at you'd be forgiven for thinking, okay, you got chaos and obviously blah blah blah, big problem, etc. Then you've got these orcs and they just destroy everything and they want to fight, blah blah blah. That would be a really serious and quite somewhat futile then relationship between that and mankind in space and all this other stuff. But then you introduce something like the Tyranids, this very malevolent, literal consumption of the universe, not just wanting a fight, because orcs inherently do not want to wipe everyone else out, because if they do, there's no one left to fight. That to me makes them one of those they're definitely a problem for the Imperium, but I wouldn't go as far as to say they were evil or malevolent or they don't seek the annihilation of the human race as an active goal. It might happen because they just keep fighting and fighting and fighting, but at the same time, the fight is what they want, not the wiping out of another thing. That makes them very, very different, to my mind, to everything else in the 40k world, which is very cool. I'm thinking now about the skirt here versus the bit up here. I'm also thinking about this sort of fabric wrap belt through the middle, and how I think I want to make that something a little bit different. So I'm gonna go with, I think, something like, that's all a bit bright, too bright, still too bright, kind of wanting a this is of course the problem with these things, is they always end up with not enough variety in the browns, and that's always been a big thing with me. Like, if you're going to have huge amounts of Model B brown, variance becomes super important. And like, we've got this real reddy brown here, and that's great. And the more I think about it, I might apply this to the skirt as well, but it definitely cannot then be for the additional bits and bobs hanging around. It cannot be for this kind of bandolier strap through the middle. That's got to then be different. That's got to be noticeably, distinctly different. For that reason, I'm thinking I might go for some... I said I wasn't going to, but I think I'm going to end up using some scale 75 paints. Let's to move the mic a moment so I can get to my paint stand. And let's grab a few of these and see where we might want to start. So we've got brown leather, red leather, black leather, and we can drive those up from there based on the values we want to achieve. I'm just going to get a few more. So the rest of that set is walnut, orange leather, and Iroko. Eventually this ends up at one of my favourite colours, birch, that you saw me explode onto a palette last time. I think one of the things that I was taught years ago that I've always been super pleased that I did, it was sandalwood and birch there, it was the reminder from a GW staff member actually, that leather is ultimately painting skin. It's tan skin, setting the creepiness of that aside, obviously. Thinking about it in that sense was really helpful. It's really useful to kind of step back from the, it's leather, so right, I need to go brown, then I need to go this, then I need to go that, to actually, at the time, I was, it was a long time ago, so I just started experimenting with, if I actually just paint it as skin, and then put brown washes of varying colour, brown and red washes over it. Where do I end up? That was really interesting. Like, it didn't give a finely detailed finish. It was quite a broad finish, but when you're painting an army, it really taught me to kind of simplify a little bit. So what I'm now thinking is this is quite a... I don't even think it's clearly in the brown family. Like, it's got red in it. It's an oxide paint, but at the same time, it's so dark, I think it does sit in the browns. So what I'm thinking is, for that bandolier strap, I might go in with the black leather. And then maybe the skirt, I think I might stick with what I've got, but when it comes to the highlighting, just go a little bit different. Because I feel like this upper piece of leather, the bit across his chest, his back, his arms, it's going to be taking hits. It's going to be there in the forefront, getting hit by things, getting chunks cut out of it. Whereas the skirt is going to be more likely ragged around the bottom, where it is, but not much else. The bandolier, again, kind of the same situation of it's worn all the time, so I'm thinking go black leather, take that right the way up to kind of like a heavily scratched, damaged, cracked leather, kind of leaning into those kind of scratch lines with birch at the end. So let's get that black leather on the palette and get that onto the bandolier. Something I really don't like. I always tend to find it's my scale 75 paints that get blocked a lot more than others. Probably my own fault most of the time. I really need to change how I'm storing them, because at the minute they're stored in one of those MDF jobbies, where they're kind of kept on their side constantly, and I have a lot of problems with like the agitator getting stuck in the fine tip, which is not ideal. There we go. And hopefully that, even just in that little bit there, you kind of see that difference in hue. The black leather has quite a lot of what is it, like purple in it almost? Yeah, I would say purple. So it's got that same, in a sense, it has that redness in it that we've got in this other leather, but a very, very different tone. And hopefully, I'm just going to go over the buckle for now, because then we can pick that out later. But having that covered in a dark colour will make it much easier to, when I inevitably forget something or miss something, will make it much easier to pick it up later. I find with a lot of these things that it's as much about mitigating the areas I'm likely to mess up as it is about painting the miniature. Let's get in there. I must admit, I did break my own rule here. Usually whenever I kind of take on I'm going to paint a display miniature, or I used to paint something for a competition, I would say, right, make sure you do not paint a miniature with something held over its chest. You want an open-chested miniature. It's a lot easier to paint. You're less likely to make really obvious mistakes because you're trying to reach around weapons. Immediately I went off and picked this miniature with a great big axe across its chest, both arms forwards. It was an interesting choice to have made, but part of it, being entirely honest, is that I wanted to try and bring a miniature that I didn't think anyone else would be bringing. Because, like, I'm pretty sure, as we've already seen at some things, we're going to see an awful lot of, like, the Lion Primarchs entered in painting competitions. We're going to see a lot of sort of Dark Angel miniatures. You always tend to see a lot of whatever the big recent releases have been. And not so much from a winning perspective, but just from a bringing something different to the table perspective. I like the idea of sharing a miniature that I love that not everyone else has necessarily either seen before or had the opportunity to kind of handle and take a look at. It's not you know, big at the end of the day to in terms of, you know, winning a competition, something like that. I don't think. But as I said, that's very much not why I'm painting a miniature for it. Not why I'm entering. It is just about getting that kind of, you know, it pushes me to do a bit of hobby, and equally, it gives me a chance to sort of check in on myself and say, hey, when I really do care about like doing something well or whatever, it's not just a bit of fun. It is for something. How well can I do? Can I paint like I used to paint yet, or am I still on that path back? And I think certainly for me, that's been a real struggle to have spent so long in the hobby. You know, I was never a, you know, astoundingly good painter or anything like that, but I was good enough. You know, I could comfortably paint miniatures. I enjoyed it. I was past the point where I really struggled with it, and I won the occasional or placed in the occasional competition. Small local stuff, nothing big, nothing meaningful. Wouldn't ever have even bothered to compete at something like a Golden Demon even then, and now, I mean, it's a different world. But yeah, I just, I think it's nice to, yeah, just nice to bring something different to those conversations rather than the same old miniatures that everyone's already seen. I am wondering if the video is coming through a little dark. Do let me know if it could do with being a bit lighter. Looking at my monitor, it almost looks like it is a bit too dark, but well, if you're watching this, let me know in the chat. Same with the audio. Hopefully now the issues have been somewhat fixed, if not totally fixed. I can't necessarily promise totally fixed, but constant improvement will do in that sense. Right, let's return to this. But what I might do is just put a bit of that dark, a bit of that dark honey in with the what was I using? The oxide brown, and just see how that changes what's going on with the skirt down here. Because I think with it being a slightly smaller bit of material, there is scope for it to be, yeah, a little bit different. Like, it always strikes me as odd when it's like, oh, well, it's leather on the same character, so it'll all be the same leather. And it's like, how exactly? Is it all exactly the same? Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, if I buy, even now, with where it's, you know, machine cut, etc., 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 if I buy 2 leather jackets from the same company, not really my style, but let's say I did, the leather would look different between the two. The cut might be the same, the style will obviously be identical and all this sort of thing, but the physical piece of leather that they are using will have some differences, and they'll all say that, right? I think whenever you look at buying something made of leather, there'll usually be a proviso around, look, the exact colour and all this sort of thing will change from each object to each object because, hey, it's made of leather. Which I think is actually quite nice. I think companies seem to now treat it as a disclaimer they need to make people aware of. To my mind, they should be saying, hey, this is a totally unique item. No one else will ever have exactly what you've got because they can't have, you know. It cannot exist twice. That to me is very cool, and I always want to try and somewhat emulate that. Like, here is a great example of, like, I could totally see the argument for this orc warrior is not going to have had, oh, whoops, there we go, not going to have had sort of 6 different sheets of 6 different animals cured in order to there we go, prime example of me making a mistake, is not going to have cured multiple leathers deliberately for some nice variety in his in his garments. He's going to have just got probably a thing, cut it up, cured it, made his relevant things from it. But even within that, there is going to be some variation. The variation doesn't need to be huge, but it just needs to be there. Otherwise, I always think it just looks a little bit just wrong. Like some things, it's too uniform, it's too exact, it's too, I've opened this brown, so now I'm going to stick with it. And I totally get that that is also just like a like an artistic painting choice to use a very limited palette of colours, etc., etc. It's a totally valid choice. It's not mine. Like I enjoy bringing different colours in, even if by different colours we are actually talking about different browns, which doesn't sound massively exciting, I grant you, but for me, I just find that the variety that you can generate, and to be fair, you can do this without introducing new colours. You can mix, you can obviously do all those things, but yeah, I personally find a lot of the joy in painting for me is in finding a home for that colour on a miniature, to be able to go, oh yeah, I know just where I'm going to put you, or to think there isn't a home for a colour on a miniature and then find it, to discover that, oh, there is space for you here. That to me is always quite special. Put the lid back on that. Need a bit more of the old oxide brown. The other thing I've got to say I really like with the Chimera colours is their bottles. I know not everyone's a fan, but I really am. I find them to just be excellent in terms of control, in terms of mixing. Just really, really good quality, simple bottles that don't cause a problem. Like, the paints separate, of course they do. They even kind of say that in their when you get a box of Chimera colours, if you haven't before, there's a whole little sheet in there basically telling you, I think it's kind of telling you chill out, because I think they know that a lot of people are going to buy them for the first time, open the box, see, assuming shipping has taken a few days, whatever, everything will have separated. Like there'll be white floating on most of the bottle tops. It's gonna look very different to if you've taken delivery of a box of Citadel paints or a box of Army Painter things, or maybe not Army Painter. They had quite a few separation problems, but you know what I mean. And with all those other paints, like, separation is a problem. Like, it's an issue they have or don't have. Whereas with Chimera, they are a bit more, as I say, kind of art paint-esque about this stuff, and go, well, yeah, of course it's separated. It's it's an emulsion of pigment, binder, and water. You are going to need to continually agitate this to maintain the emulsion. That's how paint works. And you are just expected to go, okay, I will need to continually agitate to re-emulsify this every time I want to paint them, I think with something like Citadel, you can kind of get away with not. For many of their paint, you can just open the pot, and will it be ideal? No, but you can just get away with it and go. Or at least in my experience with Chimera, that will not go well. Like, you will have problems. So yeah, and there we've got quite a nice amount of. Sorry, my light is not very well adjusted. Let me just see if I can. There we go. Change that. We've got quite a lot of variety there in the browns. Obviously, we've got the oxide, the black leather, and the dark oxide with dark honey mix down here. So that you get three fairly distinct but similar tones, which is nice. They're all leaning towards red, which I think is the key thing to kind of tie them together without just painting them all the same colour. I think the next steps really are gonna be picking out some of the we've got kind of the wrap around the green, we've got a few other bits and bobs. I'm aware though that I'm gonna need to go in with another coat of phthalo green. We're gonna need a third coat. The good thing is that, yeah, it's not building up texture or anything like that. It's not really showing any signs of that kind of problem. I'm just not quite getting the smoothness of finish that I need from, or the smoothness of finish that I need from that base coat. So I'm just going to pop some medium to there. Just going to keep thinning that till I'm not seeing brush strokes anymore left in the paint. Let's go with that. Oh, actually, this might be too thick. Yeah, a little bit of water there, I think. It's interesting, like, I really like thinning with medium, but sometimes just adding a little bit of water can really make a difference. There we are. So I just want to try and get a really nice final coat of this on. I think whether this becomes totally solid or not, I'll make this the last coat of the phthalo green and just go from there in terms of the skin, because I think, you know, I've got the depth that I need from it as a base coat, even if I haven't quite got the super firm foundation that I usually get. And I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure as to why I'm not getting what I usually get out of this paint. Like, I'm almost certain it's me and I am doing something different to what I would normally do, because this paint is almost always rock solid for me. Like, this is the first time I can remember really having issues with it, except for the very first time I used it, which was just entirely user error. Insufficient mixing, insufficient dilution, you know, just real bad job all round on my part. There we are. Although actually that does seem now to be covering reasonably well. Still not, I'll be honest, as well as I would like it to, but again, I'm not gonna... It's kind of not worth pursuing the world's most perfect base coat, when literally the next job is going to be to almost completely cover it. It's covering all the bits where it's going to end up visible, so I'm inclined to just kind of let it go, as it were. Let's get a bit more in there. Part of me wonders if the issue lies with this wet palette. Actually, when I look at it, just realised the sponge has got a somewhat decent amount of moisture in it, but probably not as much as it really wants to. Let's get that to there. Pop a bit of water on that and see if that helps us at all. See, loosen that paint up a little bit. There we are. That feels a bit more like what I'm used to feeling with this paint. Right, that's bottom half of the back. There we are. Yeah, so there you go. Prime example of failing to set up properly and then not getting the best out of an otherwise fantastic paint. The wet palette just needed more water. I think it was just drying the paint out rather rapidly, it would seem, and that was causing me to mix in paint that was not really still good for use, which is a phenomenal way to start a piece for a competition, but with it being the base coat, I don't think it's going to cause us any real problems. I feel like there's probably enough layers to come that that's just going to be a story that only we will know, and we can share that. Let me just smudge some down here. The other thing I like with this is that, like I said earlier, it can dilute so far before it starts to come apart as a paint, before it starts to fall out of emulsion, and yeah, it just makes life that little bit easier for someone like me who is not great at getting dilution levels right. Like, I did a video on it a while ago, but I just always go that little bit too far. Bit too much water, bit too much this, bit too much that. But here, there's so much pigment in this paint, and the binder is so strong that it kind of just goes and goes and goes. And when you add to that kind of the use of a medium to thin rather than just water, even for me, who, you know, just adds way too much, stretches paint way too far, suddenly it's not an issue. Like, you can just keep going. You can just crack on, still get decent coverage. Like, you know, it doesn't solve all the problems. Like, I shouldn't really need to do 3 layers for this base coat. Like, phthalo green is a strong colour. It can cover in a single coat. Though, as with all kind of, it covers in one coat. It's like, it does, but probably not the coat that you would want anyone to ever see, kind of thing. I would still even then dilute and do it in 2, but at the same time, it definitely shouldn't need 3. It only needs 3 because I dilute it too much. But there we go. The difference that a properly set up wet palette can make right there for you, that is, you now can see what I was talking about when I said about how dark and sort of solid this is as a base colour. Like, it's almost, well, on the camera, it's almost looking like black. I'm hoping on the monitor it doesn't show as total black. No, okay, yeah, you get a pretty good concept of where we're going. I know a lot of people will like to kind of just, I'm going to paint all the skin, I'm going to paint all the leather, I'm going to paint all the metal, all this sort of thing. I find it really helpful to do this in a kind of blocking in the big colours. So the green and the skin and the leather are the 2 big colours on this miniature. The only other thing is the axe, and part of me now is thinking, well, I could do that now and get a feel for the balance, but actually there's too many open questions for me about this axe. Is it going to be non-metallic metal? Is it going to be metal? Is it going to be, you know, all these things are still open, and I don't really want to close them yet. What I am, however, going to do is go in with, I've made a decision here that I do want to pick these straps out in a different leather. Only because, having seen the black leather against the dark oxide, it's very clearly a different colour, but it doesn't jump out. It doesn't cause a massive additional point of contrast, beyond what I think it should. And I think it's the kind of thing where some people will not notice it at all, but I'll know it's there, and that's, on this occasion, enough. That's enough for me to want to do it, just for that. Because otherwise I am going to be bothered by the sense that it's all one brown. It is going to bother me, whether I like it or not. I also think I need to go back in and do another little bit with that oxide, because it's not covered as well as I thought it was going to, if I'm honest. I really thought that was going to be all but a single coat, but just in a few places it's a little bit thin and flaky, which seems odd, but that's okay. We don't need to do it everywhere, which is the major thing. We can just go in and give it to the areas that visibly need another coat. I actually just missed a bit there. There we are. Sounds really silly, but hands are one of those things that I just hate painting. I always miss bits of them, the wrong angles of them, or the inverse side, or whatever it might be. And they're so obvious when you get them wrong. Like if you put the highlight in the wrong place on fingers, it just always stands out. And especially when, like me, I don't have the world's greatest brush control, they almost always go wrong. Like, I can't think of a situation in a very long time where I've been happy with a hand that I've painted. So to have gloves on the miniature really made me happy, I've got to say. It made a big difference as to like whether or not I would choose this mini. I think what I might do is go in here with these wrap elements round his waist, around his waist and the top of the skirt. I might go in for them with something quite different. And here's where I'm tempted. I could go in with like a really like shock thing of like a red sash, but I'm actually thinking that I might just go in with something like the walnut here, and then with the view to take that up to like a nice creamy colour round the waist. I don't know, because I quite like the kind of beaten look that we've got so far, but that's so different that I kind of feel like it should be something else. It kind of belongs to something else. I'm kind of wondering if I go in with something like alizarin crimson, it gives me a really deep colour to start, and then if I want to take it to red, I can. If I want to swing it into a leather, I can. That's kind of where I'm at anyway. It's quite like a browny red, incredibly rich colour. It's one of my favourite colours actually for painting on canvas with. If you just kind of do, I'm not sure if anyone has ever looked at kind of wet on wet oil paintings, but when you play with those, this is one of those colours that's going to come up for you as the base to foliage and trees, as part of your mix for earth, there's plants and all sorts of things really. It's an incredibly useful, powerful colour. If we just get that on the mini here. This is quite a thin version of it, but you can already see the kind of the strength of the red in this is there, but it's also got an incredible richness to it. Like, it doesn't need what's the right wording for it? Like, this isn't a red where you need to work very hard to punch it up. It's the kind of colour you drop in when you are pretty confident that you're going to go for a red, because otherwise you would be completely insane to put this on your miniature. Like, a lot of people, and quite rightly, love the red in this set. Literally, Chimera the red. And it is phenomenal. Like, it is powerful and punchy and pigmented and everything that reds usually end up suffering with. This paint does, or the red does, incredibly well. What Alizarin Crimson does for me is offer an incredibly rich starting point for painting red, that you don't have to fight. Like, it combines good coverage with high pigmentation. It's a dark red that doesn't suffer from actually just being a standard red with black mixed into it. Because when you see a lot of reds, an awful lot of dark reds, they are in fact a bright red with black mixed in. And that is why they tend to have better coverage than a bright red, because black has good coverage. The black pigment is there for a very sound reason. It's there to help provide coverage, and, as you know, obviously it brings the colour to where you want it as well, but that is easier, or rather cheaper, than sourcing a crimson pigment, a dark red pigment. And it's a lot cheaper as well. Like, it's not a, you know, again, it's one of those things where I would always encourage people, when they're saying about the price of paint or whatever, to look at the price of pigment, and realise quite rapidly that the price of paint is freaking astonishing. Whether it's Citadel, whether it's Army Painter, whether it's Chimera, whatever, that paint is as cheap as it is truly incredible, because pigment is incredibly expensive, generally sold by weight. Like, the amount you have to buy to be able to sell paint at a profit at the prices that miniature retailers do is quite astounding. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying paint is cheap. This is a bit like the petrol argument. Like, petrol is, without doubt, as is diesel, expensive, but when you look at what it is, you also have to be quite impressed that we can buy it at all, let alone for a somewhat affordable price for most people. You know, I never want to be on the side of oil companies. That's not a good place to be. And they, you know, without doubt, they rip people off. But at the same time, it is a modern marvel that we can say, oh, paint's expensive or petrol's expensive, all these kinds of things. Relatively speaking, we get a pretty good deal on most things these days. In my opinion, certainly it's that classic kind of, can you make it cheaper yourself? In the form of paint, I would argue no. Almost certainly not. Pigment's incredibly expensive. Good quality medium in volume is incredibly expensive. Yeah, it's really not an easy gig. Though it does look very fun, I won't lie. Maybe that's something we could do one day on the channel, is just buy some raw pigment and mix up some paints. Or I should say make some paints. It's not just a case of mixing stuff. But Yeah, I think I'm sold on that dash of red through there. That's really nice. I think that alizarin crimson was the right place to start. What I'll probably do is go from there, add a little bit of a recess shade, and then mix in a little bit of the red that we were just talking about. Just as I won't go in with too heavily with this, I might not even go to this as a pure colour. I would imagine I will end up using this as a kind of light touch element. One thing I have just thought about looking at it, we've got some scrolls down here, they're all good. We've got some hanging metally chunks and like a brazier and a bottle. We've got this little kind of satchel bag hanging here, and I'm thinking I'd quite like that to be something very different. I would like that to really, I don't say specifically stand out, but I would like it to be noticeably different. And I'm kind of wondering if I go in with something like nope, not Mars Orange. Orange would be an extremely brave choice for a bag. I'm wondering if I go in... There we are. Orange was on my mind. But something like an orange leather, but I think maybe that's a bit too, like, zing. Do I go in with, like, a bluey leather, maybe? Would that help? Because everything at the minute is very red, you know? I'm wondering if maybe if I went in with, like a real dark... Ooh, I wonder if I went in with something like Deep Rusto as a base for this. This is a really nice colour, but a bit of a pain to use if I'm honest. I always find it mixes very poorly. Give me just a minute, I'm just going to give it a blast on the vortex. So I'm going to mute for a moment. There we are. Blimey, we've been streaming for an hour and a half. Let's maybe do this and then wrap that up for now. Yeah, there we go. Look, this is without doubt one of my favourite paints in any range. A little bit of medium. Let me just pull that out. It's just such a lovely colour. Look, that's there. Look, it's just the most wonderful dark purple. Almost black, but not quite. Really stunning. And incredibly matte as well. Like, I've often found with purples that they have don't know, in a lot of ranges it seems to be that purples end up slightly more of a gloss characteristic. Sometimes that means like matte to satin, or very matte to just normal matte or something like that, but they tend to have a slightly more gloss finish than everything else in the given range. There we go. From diluting too much to not diluting nearly enough there. There we are. Lovely. That's still not quite enough, actually. The other thing is that it's so heavily pigmented. Like, I find, like, if you watch the streams where I was painting the Marauder skeleton, it's like mixing it down into a wash took an awful lot of water. That was really quite a task almost, getting it to go down to be that thin. It was a tiny little bit of paint used, which is great. Don't get me wrong. Like I said at the start of this stream, actually, I would much prefer a really thick artist-esque paint to start out the bottle, because then I've got the freedom. I've got the freedom to decide I'm going to water this down to a glaze, or I'm going to make this a wash, or I'm going to keep this really thick and use it actually to deliberately build up some texture on this miniature, or whatever the other choices available to me might be. The point is that the choices then are available to me. It's my choice, not the manufacturer's choice, as to how I use this paint. And I think overall, that is my love for Chimera. Their willingness just to say, hey, look, this is artist grade paint. That is going to introduce the following problems, or the following challenges that you're going to need to manage. Separation, knowledge around mixing, etc, etc, etc. Okay, over to you. Love that. I love that openness, that willingness to kind of say to people, hey, look, our product may not be for you. Like, if you're not interested in this, which is, is kind of not central to the hobby, historically speaking, you don't have to be. You don't have to buy this paint. It may just not be for you. Whereas, and, again, perfectly reasonable from the other side, whether it's Army Painter, Citadel, AK, etc, etc, they are much more your, anyone who wants to paint miniatures, our paints will look after you. They'll make the job easy. Or easier. It's, painting a miniature well, I don't think is ever easy, but, yeah. No, I like that. That little spot of these. I always really enjoy looking for these little opportunities. Once you've got those big areas blocked in, the skin, the leather, you start to see where you might need some pops of colour in the miniature. And like here, from that dark Rousseau wool, or dark Rusto, I think it's called, is it? Yeah, dark Rusto. We'll take it up a little bit, maybe take it as far as like a lich purple, give it some kind of gold detailing on the top. That will look really nice. I think here we've got some bits of metal, we've got some scrolls, we've got a little flask over here. We might try and do that gold. These beads could do different colours. Round the front, we've then got these like bangles round the feet. I'm looking at those and thinking, yeah, do you know what? We've got a couple of straps there. I can do those as leather. We've got some bangles. Can do those as gold. Obviously, we've got this sword at the front. That will be cool. We can do that as something a little bit nice. We've got this big axe. Great. We can do something cool with that. And I'm thinking with that, maybe I'm leaning towards true metallics, if I'm honest. Largely just down to time and the fact that I don't want to try something new, if I'm honest, on this miniature. I know it's, you should try something new every time, blah blah blah, but actually I don't have time. Just being realistic, got till the 17th of March to get this fully done on its plinth, ready to go. I'd rather just stick with what I know I can deliver reasonably well, reasonably quickly. So I'm thinking that's the plan there. As I say, these I think I might be about done with that, but I've got to say, these brushes that we were talking about earlier, the 8408s, they've been phenomenal. I've used them throughout this video, all three of them. I've been using the 2-0 for this last bit, the 2 through the middle, and the 6 for the majority of this base coating. And it's been awesome. Looks really fantastic. Yeah. I think I'd definitely recommend buying them. I mean, brush selection is always tricky, right? And I kind of said before, like, I'm trying these out. They're awesome. I didn't have a great time with the 8404s. Maybe that was just a bad set, or maybe the 8404s are actually significantly worse than the 8408s. I don't know which of those is true. Or it could be neither. It could be something else entirely. It could just all have been me. The brushes could have been absolutely fine, and I just used them very, very badly. Very, very quickly. I'd like to think not, but that's a totally realistic expectation. So, yeah, maybe definitely recommend is the wrong term. But I personally think for like 50 quid, if you want to try some new brushes, that set is a great set. Wonderful big base coat brush, reasonable all-purpose brush, fantastic small detail brush. The point on that 2.0 is really phenomenal. Certainly, I would say they are comparable. Just opening the brush box that I use for these other ones. I would say better than the 8404s, and definitely comparable to the Winsor & Newton Series 7 brushes. Still really love these. Still got a couple of sets of them, but these kind of have a very similar kind of increase in the swell here, and I still really like that. Just that natural kind of hand position really helps with being able to just hold the brush, be comfortable, know that you can control it. But yeah, I feel like that's hopefully a relatively honest review of the brushes. I guess the only thing I would say is they hold water, like a lot of water coming out of the pot. I've been just dabbing them off the whole time on paper towel, and I've just noticed there's been a lot more water coming out with them than perhaps with the Series 7s or the Artis Opus brushes. And I'm guessing that's just the sheer size of the belly on those brushes. It's quite a lot larger, which is great, but maybe not useful for everyone. Yeah, so base coat's on, real nice nice start. I think there's a solid balance of colour across the miniature. Couple of key decisions made. I'm going to crack on, and I'll be streaming again tomorrow for a few hours just to see how we go. I will catch you then.